Instructional support facilitators stand in a unique space and provide a very special kind of support for students. They are careful not to step in and do the work for students, since that would only make them perpetually dependent on outside help. But facilitators are also cautioned against standing in for instructors and teaching students what they need to know. When facilitators stand in as substitute teachers or private instructors, they expose students to the dangers of cross-teaching and possible confusion over what they need to know in order to complete an assignment or pass a test. In this video, we will talk about instructional support, commonly called tutoring, as a methodology or system of methods that facilitators use when helping students. The primary objective of tutoring is to support and assist the student in making progress toward genuine understanding. Their progress moves through three distinct stages: from an ability to recall what they need to know, to connect the new knowledge to what they already know or think they know, and finally to apply it in solving problems, enlarging their perspective, and making meaning. As a framework, we will explain the methodology of instructional support as comprising a sequence of distinct modes by which this help is provided. We can think of these distinct modes as hats a facilitator puts on at different phases in the instructional support session. And to complete our framework, we will call the full session an instructional support session cycle. By the end, a student will have achieved a deeper understanding of what they need to learn. To help us anchor this metaphor of different hats worn by a facilitator during an instructional support session, let's use the symbols of a compass, chain links, and gears. The first instructional support method is called Ask Open-Ended Questions, and even though it's one of 5 methods in our methodology, asking open-ended questions is something a facilitator will do throughout a session cycle. The human brain is a learning organ, and its natural inclination is something we call curiosity. When you think about it, curiosity is really another word for asking open-ended questions, which is what our brains are doing all the time. Even if these questions don't make it to the level of conscious verbalization, the human brain is constantly asking things like, what does this remind me of? When have I encountered that before? What's going on here? What's coming next? And so on. Facilitators need to have a repertoire of good open-ended questions to ask students when they come for help. What about this problem is familiar to you? How is it similar to what you already know? Even if you have to guess, what do you think might be your first step to the solution? A facilitator's open-ended questions activate the student's natural curiosity and get their brain engaged in the challenge. Most likely, the student has been turning a mental script of closed questions. Does this make sense? Can I do this? Is this too hard for me? Would I rather be doing something else right now? Such closed questions call for yes or no answers, and for many students seeking help, the answer inside their heads is typically closing down curiosity, not activating it. Open-ended questions help the student break out of that loop of negative thinking. They are, therefore, an essential and continuous method of instructional support during a session cycle. The first of 3 hats a facilitator wears is that of guide. The symbol of a compass represents it perfectly, since in this early phase of the support cycle, a facilitator is helping the student get oriented in the landscape where the presented problem or question belongs. Part of that landscape includes the reliable sources of what a student needs to know for completing an assignment or passing a test. A reliable source is better known as a resource, and every course has them. Among its primary resources are the classroom instructor and likely a textbook that serves as a foundational reference for what a student is expected to learn. Most courses provide supplemental resources as well, such as recommended readings, teaching videos, and internet sites. As guide, the facilitator uses a second method called Direct the Student to Resources. The student is asked to bring out his or her class notes, textbook, and other reliable sources for the course. These are the sources of what the student needs to learn and understand. If the student is not going to class or taking notes and doesn't have the textbook or other resources to work with, a facilitator might feel pressured to start teaching. But we must remember that instructional support facilitators do not stand in for teachers. If there are textbooks and other resources available to use with students, then those can be brought to the table and the facilitator can continue serving as guide for the student. But once the facilitator starts looking things up and finding answers for the student, or begins teaching what the student needs to know, instructional support as such has come to an end. Also under the hat of guide, a facilitator uses a third instructional support method called help the student make a plan. The landscape of a particular course not only includes the reliable sources of what a student needs to learn, but is itself part of a still larger context. The student's question or problem is part of an assignment. The assignment is part of a unit. The unit is part of the course itself. And the course also belongs in a larger curriculum that includes other courses in the same subject or discipline. As guide, the facilitator can assist the student in placing his or her challenge into this bigger context, making connections that will help the student appreciate its importance, link back down to things already understood, as well as up and ahead to courses that are still in the student's future. Besides serving as a larger context for perspective, helping the student make a plan moves logically into creating a strategy that will identify the steps to the answer or solution the student is seeking. Goal setting and time management are essential study strategies supporting student success, not only on this particular assignment, but across the entire landscape of education and even life itself. At this point in the instructional support session cycle, a facilitator will intentionally switch hats. Having directed the student to resources and helped the student make a plan, support moves directly to the content of what the student needs to learn. It may sound as if we're getting ready to start teaching, but instead, under the hat of interpreter, the facilitator is serving to translate what the teacher and other resources are saying into a language the student already understands. A foreign language interpreter translates the message of a speaker into a language the audience understands, but is by definition not the source of that message. Similarly, a facilitator as interpreter is not the source of what the student needs to learn, but is rather a bridge in the chain of instruction who takes abstract or difficult concepts and translates them into analogies that connect for the student. The good teacher should already be doing this in the classroom, but it might take more time for a student to really get the message. To function best under the hat of interpreter, a facilitator should be familiar with the quality world of the student being served. By quality world, we mean the thoughts, values, and beliefs that occupy the student's mind, where he or she feels most confident and at home. A student who is also an athlete or artist is presumably interested in sports or the arts, but may not feel very confident in learning calculus. As interpreter, the facilitator will translate abstract math concepts into the student's quality world by using analogies and examples that connect to what the student already knows. Notice once again that the facilitator is not teaching, but translating. The facilitator is not the source, but a bridge for what a student needs to learn. Serving in this way, the facilitator is modeling for the student how to make connections between new knowledge and what is familiar. This is another brain-based learning skill that will help the student eventually become an independent learner. By this time in the instructional support session cycle, a facilitator will bring the student's focus to the original question or problem. Now, with the resources in hand, a plan in place, and difficult concepts translated and better understood, the student is ready to put things into gear. The facilitator should have a pretty good idea of where the student is stuck, and their work together can shift into the next phase and our fourth instructional support method called Build Mini Lessons for the Student. A mini lesson is a focused example of what the student needs to learn. Mini refers to a basic element that needs to be mastered, a short lesson that breaks the challenge down to a level where the student can gain proficiency with the necessary steps, rules, and skills in order to build understanding. Once the mini lesson is presented to the student, a facilitator will switch hats from interpreter to coach. As in the realm of athletic games, a coach doesn't spend much time on the history of a sport or the theory behind it. Instead, he or she gives careful attention to the techniques and skills that each player needs to master. In the same way, the facilitator will observe and guide the student as he or she works on the problem. This brings us to our fifth and final instructional support method. Provide the student with guided practice. It's helpful at this point if the facilitator actually gets up and leaves the student alone to work. That way, the student won't be tempted to give up or ask for help too soon. The facilitator will come back after the student has had adequate time with the problem, asking open-ended questions and giving constructive feedback. We know that another brain-based learning skill involves practicing a new behavior again and again until it becomes established as a new habit. Once that happens, the newly acquired habit can serve as foundation for more difficult and complex challenges. In providing the student with guided practice, a facilitator as coach is once again modeling for the student how to stay engaged with the problem until its solution is reached. If the same student requests help later on, a facilitator can decide just where in the support cycle they need to start or resume their work together and put on the appropriate hat. Let's review what we've covered in this video. Can you name the 3 hats an instructional support facilitator wears during the course of a session? Guide, interpreter, and coach. Can you list the 5 instructional support methods in sequential order? Start with the method a facilitator uses throughout a session. Ask open-ended questions. Direct the student to resources. Help the student make a plan. Build mini lessons for the student. Provide the student with guided practice. What is a full turn of instructional support called? The instructional support session cycle. Good job! Now go out there and make a difference.